Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to the second half of chapter 8. Um, I got tied up yesterday, so I was not able to come back, but I'm back today, ready to finish part 2. We were talking about the different traumas that sometimes are handed down in part 1. We talked about spanking, the trauma of poverty, the trauma of neglect, the trauma of, let's see, hunger. Okay. And now we're going to go ahead and go into the next one that she labels here, of things that needs to be sometimes made aware that it is part of our conscious makeup. Sometimes it's lingering there, unchecked. Maybe even we're unaware of it. We're talking about things that sometimes are handed down and we accept them just without any type of critical examination of whether or not this is good to keep. There's lots of things that we hand down just automatically that may not necessarily serve us any longer, right? When you didn't know, okay. But now that you know, now you're able to make an educated decision as to what's best. And so we're talking about some of those things that are handed down that we don't necessarily understand has taken up residence within our spiritual makeup. And so these were some of the things we talked about. If you haven't watched part 1 of chapter 8, Unbinding the Bloodline, go back and watch part 1 and then join us here for part 2. The next one that she names is Abandonment as Trauma. Many of us were left not always by doors slamming or people vanishing, but by emotional absence, broken promises, and love that was inconsistent, unavailable, or withdrawn as punishment. The inner child received a message: I am not worth staying for. My needs are too much. Love always leaves. I do not need anything to be safe. Abandonment is not always physical. It is the moment someone chose that their silence over your safety was necessary. Their discomfort over your care was necessary. It is the wound that teaches the heart to close preemptively, to leave before being left, to shrink before anyone asks you to go. The body begins to recognize the departure and carry the absence. Abandonment creates the smog that precedes intimacy, the fear that fears the beauty of connection, that distrusts even the presence of love. It's almost like, what is the word I'm looking for? Sabotage, self-sabotage, right? That's kind of like what it sounds like. Spiritual hygiene insight is abandonment leaves a hole in the hollowness in the soul's energy field. It is a vacancy that echoes. Spiritual hygiene teaches us that abandonment is not simply an emotional experience. It is a spiritual fracture where the self learns to disconnect from itself and everyone else to survive. We spiritually abandon ourselves when we suppress needs, silence feelings, or seek love from sources that cannot sustain us. Healing abandonment requires a return, a daily, sacred act of showing up for the inner child who still waits by the door. The beautiful thing about this too is that this is something when we're dealing with the trauma of abandonment, like we can learn to fill that hole for ourselves. Because the truth of the matter is, people will disappoint. They will fall short. They'll make mistakes because they're operating in their own traumas sometimes, their own inefficiencies, their own sense of self-unawareness. And so I think part of this too, we have to take responsibility for within ourselves and find ways to fill those gaps, especially when we know that we have abandonment trauma. To know is half the battle. Then we won't be so easily sucked in, right, to some of the traps that pull us in When we look at the somatic residue, this may show up as tightness or aching in the heart center or the solar plexus. It may show up as like shallow breathing or holding the breath unconsciously. It may show up as numbness in the chest or arms, especially when receiving affection. It can show up as clenching of the jaw or chest during moments of intimacy, or a sudden withdrawal or disassociation during moments of vulnerability, restlessness when alone, or an anxious urgency to secure connection. Those are some ways that it could show up. Not the only ways, but I'm sure she's naming some things that she has seen in this instance. There are clearing movements like heart opening postures such as seated chest lifts, gentle back bends, or arms extended outward with breath. One of the things that I love to do, and I don't necessarily have to feel anxious to do it, is to give a real good stretch, reach my arms up to the sky and just allow my body to extend and to receive everything that's good in that moment. Some of these things are so simple, but it's a matter of knowing, how to help the body. Another thing is swaying from side to side while hugging the self, right? Giving yourself a hug, offering rhythmic reassurance, kind of like a baby. Sometimes a baby knows naturally how to self-soothe. They'll just rock. Nobody taught them how to do that. They're just following the prompt of their body, right? Sometimes kneeling or seated postures while rocking forth and back to soothe the nervous system. Mirror movements with eye contact and spoken affirmations of presence and worth. Breath-infused tapping over the sternum and heart with the mantra, I am here, coming back into the body. So the spiritual hygiene practice is to cleanse the imprint of abandonment is to restore the soul's sense of sacred belonging. We begin not with others, but with a divine covenant to never leave ourselves again. Through breath, ritual, movement, and spiritual affirmations, we tend to the spaces where love once disappeared, and we fill it with presence. And so I know this sounds really simple. In ways it is, but at the same time, it's also understanding that this is a work in process. Once you become aware of what you need, right, you begin to become open to learn more about that and become open to find out what type of things you can help yourself get over that or heal that. And again, it's not linear. It comes in stages, and it comes with the opportunity to see these things in action. And so, not to make it sound easy, because it's not, but it's giving just simple, gentle ways to start this healing process. Okay? Through breath, through ritual or routines, through movement, through spiritual affirmation, speaking to yourself, writing, journaling, we tend to the spaces where love once disappeared, and we fill it with presence, no longer looking outwardly to feel that, but looking within to feel it, right? The hygienic reframe affirmation says, I cleanse the lie that I am unworthy of lasting love. I return to myself with devotion. I am never alone in the presence of my own soul. Never, never alone. And I even go so far to let you know you are never alone. When we really get to understand that we are all one. And I can go so far as to say, even just because people have passed on to another part of their journey, they're no longer in the physical body, does not mean that they're no longer present with us. To be absent from the body is to be present in spirit, right? I guess I won't open up that can of worms. We live in many dimensions. We're just in one of them. We exist in one. However, we can access others if we're open to do that. We're never alone, literally, figuratively, energetically, spiritually. And the most powerful presence that we have is our very own soul. Okay. The next one says bullying as trauma. So many of us were told to toughen up or to just ignore it or don't let them see you cry. But the inner child received another message entirely. The inner child heard, "You're not safe. Your voice is not enough. You must change to belong. You are alone." Bullying is the slow erosion of self-worth through repeated emotional, verbal, physical, or psychological harm. Often, while those in authority, while those in authority remain silent or complicit, whether in childhood, adolescence, or adulthood, bullying imprints a somatic message of shrink to survive or stay silent to stay safe. The body internalizes bullying as a form of social exile and emotional terror. It begins to anticipate rejection, critique, and abandonment, even in safe environments. I think this is a big one too, because so many times we experience situations where we are supposed to feel safe or have a level of protection, and it never shows up, or it doesn't happen, right? And we sometimes, especially if you've experienced childhood bullying, like it's so easy. That's a thin line. It's so easy to go back there and relive that trauma, right? And so this is a huge one. And sometimes we feel like we've gotten over it when really we haven't. We've learned to master the trauma. We've learned to survive by sometimes shrinking back or shrinking ourselves, right? When we are, whatever that thing is that leads us into the situation of bullying, it's like, oh, well, this must not be right, so let me stop. Oh, this does not align with the whole, what everybody else is doing, so I should probably stop because it's garnering negative attention. Well, that's not your problem per se. That's their problem. What people think of you or how they treat you is not about you. That's one thing that I learned. It's about them. It's about their character or lack thereof, right? I've met some pretty interesting people, and I've also learned to be very open and accepting of people. One of the things that I learned is tact, T-A-C-T, is seeing people the way that they want to be seen. That's the highest level of tact, right? Seeing people the way that they want to be seen. And in turn, you receive that back, right? You receive that back. As a matter of fact, I am one for the underdog. Like, I will step in when I see bullying, even when it's not visible. I can see it. I can feel it. And I tend to jump in to even the playing field. That's part of what I've been called to do. But this thing about bullying is traumatic. And for some reason, there's this energetic signature that it gives off. You know, sometimes we look at, and I'm going to use this as an example. Sometimes we look at what we call today a narcissist, right? They say narcissist looks for a certain type of person to attach to. It's the same thing for bullies, right? They look for a certain type of person to attach to. It's always the one that's different. It's always the one that seems to be alone, right? That seems to be the one left to the side, or the weakest link, we'll say. But sometimes that person is the strongest person. That's how they're able to survive alone. It's the one that doesn't need the group confirmation, right? It's the one that's able to hold their own and stand in their own strength and their own power. Now, whether that person knows it or not is left to be determined, but it takes a lot to stand on your own. So don't get it twisted for the bullies out there. Don't get it twisted. You might mess around and find out, right? And so this is all about handing this down. Now, when we take it to this level of what we're talking about in this book as something that's handed down. Like, what does that look like? So you have someone who has sometimes learned these behaviors. When we look at the mindset of the bully, this is somebody that many times have been bullied and has taken that and replicated it because they somehow believe that that's how you need to be. You need to be tough. You need to be on top and never let anybody, rule over you. And so you have to have this bullish type of energy, right? Get them before they get you type of stuff. But not everybody interprets that or internalizes bullying that way. There are some people that take that on and they're like, poor soul. Like, what has happened to that person to make them be that way is the question, And of course, that would probably be like an empath that would think that way. But you take somebody that takes that type of reaction to being bullying. Now you have someone who not only treats people, general people that they know that way. Sometimes that is also the energy that is fed to their own families, right? Imagine a bully as a parent, right? Imagine a bully as a significant other. Imagine a bully as an uncle or an aunt or a grandmother for that. That energy as a pattern that's been handed down. And I guess sometimes we can say that even about boys. And when we're raising boys, it's like, you better not cry. You better be the best. You better not come home and, all that foolishness. When really we need to give space for them to grow up in their authenticity. Like, I think we put too much on it sometimes, and not to try to teach anybody how to parent, but to provide space for them to grow through their authenticity is the most potent form of parenting. And I think is very valuable. Not that we can't provide structure, but to give them the freedom to be who they're going to be. And we do that mostly by our example. Not do as I say, not as I do. We do it by example. But to think of like a parent as a bully, like that's scary, right? It's scary. And so some of these things are handed down in that way. Bullying as a trauma. It's a trauma sometimes that has been handed down. And bullying does not just bruise the ego. It distorts the heart's radiance. It covers your light in layers of self-doubt, over-adaptation, or quiet shame. In spiritual hygiene, bullying is a spiritual pollutant, a force that clouds your divine image and clutters your energetic field with feet of visibility and rejection. To cleanse this trauma is to remove the residue of unworthiness left by others' projections. Because really that's what it is. We've taken on someone else's projection and we've put that on as a suit of armor. This is what I'm supposed to be, right? And so you are not what they said. You are not what they laughed at. You are not their fear dressed up as cruelty. And you are radiant. You're beautiful. You are handsome. You're amazing, right? This is the part where we get to remember that how people see us is really how they see themselves, especially in this case. When we look out, we're really mirroring, right? We're really mirroring. When we look out, many times what we're seeing is a reflection of what's inside of us. Sometimes it's not even true, right? We're projecting. And so when it comes to bullying, sometimes it's good to remember that it's not our business how people see us. That's not our business. That's all about them, right? We don't have to receive that. The somatic residue is a rounded posture, a sunken chest from a learned invisibility, right? So sometimes that is the posture that you'll see. A tight jaw, again, tension in the neck and shoulders from silenced expression, nervous laughter, people pleasing, or apologizing for existing. Heightened social anxiety, hyper awareness of others' reactions, inability to receive praise or feel safe, invisibility. Okay, those are some signs. So if you feel some of those things, maybe there is a little bit of unresolved tension in that area, but you can clear it, right? Some of the things that you can do through movement to help release these types of tensions when they arise in the body: standing tall, lifting your chest, and opening your arms wide while breathing deeply. Like I was telling you about that posture yawn that I do often. It's like, ugh. Anything that's stuck, that's trying to keep me small, no, sir. No, ma'am. Listen, no, we're expanding every area. So things like that is like an unconscious reminder to ourselves, our minds, our bodies, our spirits, right? We are expanding. We are breaking out of the box that people try to put us in. There's vocal release, sounding out, yells, sighs, chants to restore expression. Sometimes singing, that's huge for me. But like I was saying, if you have to go out to an empty field miles away and just let her rip, do that. Do that. Or it could just be a gentle sigh. Right? Whatever you need to do. It could be chants, right? Chants work as well. Looking in the mirror at yourself, mirror affirmation movements, making eye contact with yourself in the mirror while moving with strength and grace, right? Have you ever danced in front of the mirror, allowed yourself to do sacred movements and just watching yourself in the mirror? Powerful, powerful stuff. Listen, stomping or a power pose, reclaiming your space in the body and environment with phrases like, I belong here. I am not invisible. I take up space. I will take up space. Listen. And then there's clearing movement practices that you can do by beginning to open with those arm movements with your chest lifted, breathing deeply. Place your hands on your solar plexus or your heart and affirm, I am strong. I am safe. I am not what they said, right? Mirror work with your eye contact and posture expansion. And then you can end with grounding, your feet planted on the floor. If you're in the grass, even better. And speak these words: I take up space. I stand in my worth. I belong, right? And that's a clearing movement practice exercise. If you want to make that a ritual, that's an easy way to clear that energy. Spiritual hygiene practice is cleansing the imprint of bullying, which involves clearing the energetic field of humiliation and restoring the sacred identity of self. Through embodied declarations, posture reclamation, and spiritual affirmations, we reestablish the field as one of dignity, presence, and rightful belonging, right? This is the body work of reclaiming your space, body, breath, and voice. It is the courageous return to your soul's full stature, unapologetic and whole. Here, we reclaim sacred ground in your body, in your field, in your voice. This is where you rise into the full measure of your soul without shrinking, without shame. This is about embodying your truth without apology, inhabiting your voice, your energy, your presence without leaving pieces of yourself behind. The path of healing is a return to wholeness. It is where you rise in the full presence of your spirit and no longer ask for permission to be. So many times, even with this, one of the things that can happen is instead of accepting ourselves in our wholeness in an unapologetic way, we sometimes will choose others instead of choosing ourselves. And we'll give away parts of ourselves instead of stepping into this proclamation of who we are. This healing, right? We'll no longer do that, right? Once we start to acknowledge ourselves and our right to exist in the fullness of who we are without apology. No longer will we piece ourselves away to hold on to others. No, we'll choose ourselves. If there's any question that we have, right? We choose ourselves because we're not willing to give away what we work so hard for, right? The hygienic reframe affirmation is I cleanse the residue of shame and rejection. I reclaim my right to be seen, to be heard, and to be honored as I am. And the most powerful thing about that is you get to a place where you don't really care, right? This is what we're doing. This is what I'm doing. And it's no longer important whether people like it, whether they accept it, because I'm doing this for me. That's the most powerful position that you can be in, no matter what we're talking about. No matter what we're talking about. Do it for you. Okay? Do it for you. The next one says sexual abuse in women, specifically women, as trauma. Okay? Because it's a difference. And then we'll go into sexual abuse in men. But in women, the sacred space of the body is not just physical, it is also spiritual. When that space is violated, especially in childhood, the soul often disassociates to survive. Many survivors learn to leave the body long before they can leave the circumstance. Sexual trauma fragments the sense of safety, worth, sensuality, and even self-identity. It can create both hyper-awareness and numbness. It often replaces pleasure with shame. Sexual violation of the sacred body leaves an energetic residue and ignites the trauma voices of guilt and shame. Movement, breath, and sound are important to cleanse shame from the body's temple. So the spiritual hygiene insight is that it teaches that the womb, that's why I teach about the womb. This is so important for women. Oh, I can't understate that. It teaches that the womb and the body are holy temples. Just think about that. This thing that we call a womb, that's the name we gave it, right? And depending on where that name came from, will determine like the mindset around why it was called the womb. But this thing that we call the womb is the portal of life, right? No one comes into being really without passing through this portal. Okay, I know we have all this science now, but can we really consider that? I don't know. That's a whole different subject. And I don't know what type of womb that baby would be born or, grew in, but there would still be a need for a womb. There's so many different important processes that the womb provides. But this is the body for the woman, provides a space, and it is why the body is considered a holy temple. It's a holy temple. And when those temples are desecrated, you know what that means, to desecrate something? Let's look that word up. In my mind, I'm thinking of somebody that would go into like a place that was meant for maybe something very sacred. And treat it as common. Okay, to take something sacred and treat it as common. That's what it means to desecrate something. Treat a sacred place or thing with, or not even common, but to treat it with violent disrespect. And if you ask me, that's partly the reason why we are in this mental fog as a whole, is because we no longer value this sacred temple. Mother Earth is one, right? We can look at the way we treat the waters, the seas, how we just pollute on the side of the roads. And, we can go on and on. Mother Earth is a sacred vessel. Look how much she gives and gives and gives and gives and gives and gives and gives. If you're breathing right now, and gives and gives. If you're able to drink fresh water, and gives, right? And a woman's body is the same. Look at how much we give and give and give and give. Who said that the children were 18 and grown and they go on to be their own? And give and give. to take something that's sacred and not only treat it as common, but treat it violently, violate it. Wow. What would we do if Mother Earth just stopped giving and just said, I'm not giving anymore? What would we do? There is a movie that I'm often reminded of, and I'm sorry to go off track, and it's called is it The Happening? The Happening, when the plants began to turn against humans and they began to excrete this toxin that would cause our brains to scramble and self-destruct. Have you guys saw that movie? The Happening, I think is the name of it. What would happen if Mother Earth decided to stop giving? What would happen if women decided to stop giving? That's a question. So this is not just about sexual abuse. This is about desecrating the holy temple, okay? Back to where I was. Spiritual hygiene teaches that the womb and the body are holy temples. And when those temples are desecrated, the soul fragments. That's how it affects the woman's body or the girl's body. The soul fragments, it splits apart. Sexual trauma is not only physical, but also spiritual defilement that can congest the energetic field with shame, secrecy, and soul silence. Somatic residue is numbness in the pelvic region and inability to feel sexual sensation. Cycles of pain or inflammation in the womb, in the hips, and in the lower abdomen. Difficulty with eye contact or vulnerability in intimacy. Panic or shutdown responses to touch. And I think that's just a few, but there's so many ways that affects the body and the psyche. But there are clearing movements, and some would be womb breathing and hip circling, right? We talk about, what is that? I was with my coworkers this week, and one of my coworkers wanted to learn how to, what is that? When you twerk, she wanted to learn how to twerk. And we all looked at each other. We were like, you going to teach her? You going to teach her? And I'm like, it's easy. Just move your hips. Just let your hips do what they want to do. Let them roll back and forth. And, but that's a way to release this trauma from the pelvic area. Even as I'm moving right now, it just feels good. And of course, as where we are right now, we take everything and turn it into something sexual. Who knew that twerking was actually a sacred dance, a sacred African dance? Who knew? Yes, it is. Who knew that this whole time we were actually healing ourselves when we were twerking? Now, minus the music that's actually putting a different message in our head, if we turn this into something sacred, how beautiful that is. You see how the enemy will take something negative and contort it and distort it into something and use it for something totally different. But this is one way to clear through movement, is womb breathing and hip circling, and reconnect safety with the root and the sacral chakra. So the root is the first, the sacral is the second chakra, right? And this is where the sexual energy is held, is down in that pelvic area. But it must start at the root, because remember we were talking in the first video that the energy rises upward, and it starts from the root, balancing and energizing and connecting through the root, right? And then it rises up. So these are the two chakras that we are concerned about here. We can also do guided self-massage of the thighs, hips, and belly to restore autonomy, to restore control, right, of our bodies. We can do sound and breath movement to reclaim voice, sighing, humming, and groaning with intention, right? Sound is amazing. Just hums are powerful. We call them mantras or, mantras. Movement done in the mirror, clothed or unclothed, to slowly integrate the gaze with self-love, right? There's nothing more powerful than the love that you cultivate for yourself. And that can be done that way, by accepting yourself, Stand in front of that mirror, butt naked. Listen, this is what it is. And I love it. Every curve, every inch, every stretch mark, that is the proof of your holy temple. The fact that it works, the fact that it's stretched to bring life into this world, right? That's proof. There's nothing shameful about that. Stand in front of that mirror and reclaim yourself. That's powerful. And nothing can break the love that you have for yourself when you do that regularly. Affirmation to speak aloud is, my body is mine. My pleasure is mine. My safety is holy and untouchable now. And the fact that we live in such a degraded society that we can't even really stand in our natural sensuality, right? We can't even really express the nature of our sensuality without somebody, turning it into something degrading. And it's sad. In one of my one of my chapters that we read, I was talking about that sacred movement, how back in the motherland, there was a time where women didn't have to wear shirts, and we'll still see that because they still, in some parts of Africa, there's still that sacred reverence for the holy temple. We're talking about women's bodies, right? They didn't have to wear shirts. And the reason why is because the mentality wasn't destructed, right? The mentality didn't immediately go to sexuality or, and so they don't have to wear shirts because there is a sacred reverence for the woman's body. There is a purpose for the woman's body. And so over here, though, because we are so sexualized and because that has been something embedded in this culture, this is one of those things that has, like we're talking about here, things that's been handed down and has been embedded in some of the patterns and some of the different ways that we think. Over sexuality is one of them, right? We look back at what happened during the transatlantic slave trade, right? How women were used, how children were used, and even some of the men were used for sexual abuse, I'm gonna call it. This is embedded in the very fiber. That's why we have become over sexualized. You can't sow a seed and not reap, right? This is the product of that. And so because of that, we have this overactive thing going on imaginatively, but it doesn't change the fact that the temple is holy. It doesn't change the fact that this is a very natural part of our being that we should not have to shame and hide and pull away from for fear of being disrespected, right? Unfortunately, that's how it is. That's what we've come to. And so you knowing that you are sacred women, you knowing that your body is holy, that there's nothing to be ashamed of, that we were created for this, right? It's rightfully ours, a part of the process, what we've come here to experience. There's nothing shameful about that. You knowing that is empowering and will help you stand in your power. Again, you are not responsible for how other people perceive your experience. That's their experience that they're perceiving you through. That's none of your business. But you don't be ashamed of your body. You don't be ashamed to show up, right? In any part of who you are that you feel called to show up in. Sometimes I feel very, very sensual. That's very much a part of who I am. I don't apologize for that. That's who I am. And I've done a lot of healing to show up in that very authentic part of who I am. And I'm unapologetic for it. I love that part of myself, just like I love the other parts of me, right? And so this is very healing. It's very healing. The hygienic reframe is, my body is mine. My pleasure is mine. My safety is holy and untouchable now. Okay. That's the affirmation that you can speak out loud. And these are some of the clearing movements to help you if need be. So spiritual hygiene practice, sacred movement becomes a ritual of reclamation, of you reclaiming this power that is rightfully yours, women. Cleansing the inner sanctuary includes affirming the right to pleasure, to safety, and to sacred embodiment. Sound, breath, and movement help to detoxify energetic imprints from the root and sacral chakra. So that's what the movement is about. It's about releasing those energetic imprints. And the reframe affirmation is, I cleanse my womb space with love. I release the residue of violation. My body is sacred, and I now live in it fully. What does that word fully mean? That means not leaving anything out. I live in it fully, right? And so this is beautiful. I love this for us. I love it. Now to look at the men, because sexual trauma does happen in men as well. The sacred body of a man is often left out of the conversations around sexual trauma. Conditioned to be strong, silent, and untouched by vulnerability, many men carry wounds in silence, buried under shame, confusion, and suppression. When the sacred boundary of the male body is violated, especially in childhood, the soul often splits. So that happens to them as well. The soul, it splits, disassociating to survive. The body becomes a battleground of mistrust, and the split may retreat from physical sensation altogether. What remains is a quiet war between numbness and rage, shame, and silence. It's interesting because I end up having not a conversation, but I watched a video of a man that was giving his testimony about being sexually abused by a friend of his mother who really watched, who would come and go, what time they would come and go. She was very strategic. And he said he was about 13 or something like that. And she ended up catching him at home and abused him. He was still a child, but because he was a boy, when he went to tell what had happened, other men congratulated him and they gave him daps, right? They were like, congratulations, you just became a man. And in his description of what happened, he was confused because he was like, what do you mean? Like, I'm confused. How is this okay? I think he said he went along with it for the fact that he was confused. He was like, well, maybe this was, okay, some type of rite of passage or something, but it was in fact abuse. For some reason, men are treated differently in this area. But when we really look at it, it's the same, right? You take a young child who hasn't developed the capacity mentally to understand the nature or the consequence of sexual action, and you place them in that situation, like that's super confusing. And it's just as detrimental to their spiritual and energetic bodies as well. And I found that video very interesting because we don't usually talk about this issue as much as we do with women or with girls. We kind of, leave out the boys. Again, that's the mentality that we've learned. Just like we tell the boys, you're not supposed to cry and you better get up. You better not cry. Like we were teaching them to disassociate from the feminine aspect of their being, the feminine aspect of everybody's being. We all have feminine energy, just like we all have masculine energy. One without the other is unhealthy and is a detriment mentally, spiritually, energetically, right? And so we teach boys very early to disassociate from parts of themselves. And that's traumatic. It ends up being, problems in different areas later on in life. But as far as the men, sexual trauma in men fractures the inner altar of power, identity, and presence. It can distort the sense of self, sever connection to pleasure, and silence the voice. Many men internalize the violation as weakness, believing they should move on while their soul is still frozen in time. Others hide the violation, taking on the burden that sex between males is sinful and wrong. Men more often than women fall into the trap of believing something I did made this happen. We take on that responsibility and the blame for it when it wasn't our fault, which invites the trauma voices of guilt and shame to become the killer critic and the hanging judge. At its worst, the experience can morph into the belief if I were a real man, this wouldn't have happened, or I would have stopped it, so I deserved it, which can result in a lifelong identity issues, self-identity issues, because we blame ourselves, and it fractures a deep sense of who we are. And so it does affect men too. It does. And I would go so far as to say, when we get down to a spiritual level, it's no longer even a separation. When we look at female and male, we're looking at certain, how do I want to say this? We're looking at certain purposes that we've been assigned to in life. When we look at the woman, there's certain purposes that a woman brings to the human experience, like birthing life, right? For the male, there's certain purposes too. But when we look at it from a spiritual level, we are all souls. We're all of spirit. When we get down to the very essential of what we are, it's no longer about gender, right? It's all about the essence of our being. And when that's fractured, we got problems. I don't care if you're a woman. I don't care if you're a man. When that gets fractured, we have problems. And when we talk about sexual trauma, that goes that deep. But the spiritual hygiene insight, this healing is not about explaining the trauma. It is about cleansing what the trauma left behind, the shame, the silence, disassociation, and false identities. When a man's or a boy's body is defiled, his spirit may leave the room. His voice may shrink. His presence may become performative rather than embodied. Spiritual hygiene for the masculine is about restoring sovereignty, bringing the soul back into the temple of the body, and the body back into communion with divine truth. That's what this is about. Coming back into the truth about who we are, divine truth. No matter what the experience has been in these bodies, there is a divine truth at the core of our being. It's getting back to that we are worthy. We were born worthy. We were always worthy. And we don't have to do anything to deserve that, to earn that. We are. The somatic residue in the male body is chronic tightness in the jaw, the fists, or the lower back. Sometimes it's erectile dysfunction, genital numbness or hypersensitivity. Sometimes it's a startle response, muscle clenching or flinching from touch. Sometimes it's avoidance of emotional vulnerability or physical intimacy. And sometimes it's internalized rage or mistrust of one's own body or desires, right? So there are clearing movements for men as well. Things that help to ground by kneeling with breath. So you can sit or kneel on the ground and breathe deep from the belly. Do you know what that means? We are actually taught to breathe incorrectly. When we take in air, why does our stomach suck in when we're taking in air? If we're taking in air, our stomach should expand, right? So to breathe deeply means when you're taking in air, your diaphragm is getting big like a balloon. Like sit and kneel on the ground and breathe into the belly, and then till you can feel your spine. This posture honors humility and connection to self. There's also shoulder rolling and arm circling. I like the shoulder rolling. That works for me. Reclaiming the chest and the heart space, softening the armor of protection. And then there's the pelvic rocking or sitting or seated hip circles, right? Gently clothed movement to restore sensation and sacred connection to the root chakra. So sitting in a chair and just rocking the pelvic area. There's also sound practices like releasing breath through low grounding tones. An example is hum, or oh, ah, right? Those restore vibrational trust. there's a frequency, right, that helps the healing process as well. There's also the mirror presence for men as well. Stand or sit in front of the mirror, clothed or unclothed. Make sustained eye contact and speak your name. Reclaim your image with compassion. And then the spoken affirmation for men is, my body is sacred. My truth is safe with me. I reclaim my power from the shadow of silence. So the spiritual hygiene practice that can help here is to begin with prayer. Invite your spirit back to your body, right? I call my power back. I call my energy back to my body in places where I may have left it and not reclaimed it, right? Acknowledge the violation without re-entering the story. Call your power back from that situation without re-entering the trauma of the story. Anoint your body, okay? Get some oil, or you can use water and touch your chest with it. Touch your belly, touch your thighs while affirming, this is mine. This is sacred. You can also create safety rituals. You can also create safety rituals by wrapping yourself in a blanket and listening to grounding tones. Have you guys ever heard of whole tones? Frequencies, healing frequencies. So the tones that might be helpful, Ayanla thinks, in this situation is going to be 417 hertz. So you can search this on YouTube and pull up grounding tones, 417 hertz or 528 hertz or 396 hertz. Or you can surround yourself with symbolic masculine protectors. And that would be things like stones, symbols, or ancestral tokens, right? And then there's also daily mirror work where you make eye contact with yourself in the mirror while breathing, and that helps to restore truth, okay? So the hygienic reframe, the affirmation for this is, I am not what happened to me, men. I am the sacred witness who survived. I now choose to live, feel, and reclaim my body in full truth. Okay, that's for you, men. That's beautiful. So men need healing just as much as we do as women. Listen, this is a soul thing, not a gender thing, okay? A lot of times we address the woman's trauma and we forget about the men because we were taught that they're supposed to be strong and they're supposed to be able to handle and endure anything. That's so far from the truth. Men were once boys, and as boys, they also were vulnerable sometimes, and things happened to them as well. There were parts of them that were fractured during the trauma of what happened as well. They also need healing. So this is for the men too. Ancestral trauma is not just your personal story. It is the unprocessed grief, the unprocessed fear, the unprocessed silence and survival that has been encoded into your DNA. It is the cry of your great-grandmother's womb. It is the echo of your great-grandfather's shackled choices. It is what your ancestors couldn't speak of, right? They couldn't. Yet you feel it every time you try to rise beyond their pain. Modern science calls it epigenetics, the study of how trauma is passed down biologically through gene expression. However, long before science, spirit knew, your bones knew. The soul recognized that what is unhealed in one generation is carried by the next. Energetically and spiritually, ancestral trauma can linger for 7 generations, 7 and beyond. In many traditions, African, indigenous, and Eastern spiritual systems, it is taught that 7 generations always live within you, as we learned that with women, right? That we women, when we're born, we already carry the generations to come, the eggs carry generations to come in the woman's DNA, right? You are the dream of those who survive. We are now living the dream, right? If we go back to our ancestors who dreamt of a day that they would be able to walk down the street without fear, that they would be able to be single if she wanted to. She didn't have to marry. She didn't have to be, covered or told what to do, where to go, how we're going to live, or taken care of. She didn't have choices. Well, we do now, right? We are the dream of the ancestors in real time. You are the burden bearer of what was never released. At the same time, we are also carrying the burden of what they didn't release, the trauma, the pain that was never justified. It was never reconciled. Yeah. And it's heavy. And I'm speaking personally and collectively. Yeah. If your ancestors endured slavery, genocide, famine, addiction, abandonment, sexual violation, or systematic erasure, without the space or power to process that pain, that energy did not disappear. Energy does not cease. It just continues to flow. Sometimes it morphs. It descended, okay, in this case, which means you inherited it. This means that you, the healing one, you, the aware one, you, are often the first in the line to say, this is not normal, and start asking questions. Where did this pattern come from? And what is this pain trying to teach me? What is it? Right? It's the one that decides to ask questions and not just follow along. Just because you're expected to follow along. It's okay to ask questions. Spiritual hygiene insight. You carry more than your own story. Okay. Ancestral trauma is encoded in your energy field. Spiritual hygiene includes ritualized movement, spoken release, and reverent return to what was never yours to hold. Spiritual hygiene acknowledges that the body is not just a personal vessel, it is a lineage altar. Ancestral trauma is the energetic inheritance of unprocessed sorrow, fear, shame, and silence that lives in your field until it is named and released. Give me 1 second. The ancestral trauma versus the voice of inheritance. So ancestral trauma is energetic, it is emotional, and spiritual residue from unhealed trauma passed down through bloodlines. The voice of inheritance is inherited beliefs, coping mechanisms, or emotional patterns learned from caregivers or culture. Ancestral trauma is present in the body without a conscious awareness of the cause. I've always just felt grief. I don't know why. But the voice of inheritance is repetitive thoughts like, this is just who we are. This is the family. We don't, right? So ancestral trauma is often rooted in events you never experienced personally, but were shaped by, like a migration or an enslavement or a forced silence. The voice of inheritance is rooted in family rules, traditions, roles, and emotional modeling. Ancestral trauma is healed through somatic ritual, energetic clearing, and lineage reclamation. The voice of inheritance is healed through awareness, reframing, and conscious disruption of patterns through intention. Ancestral trauma feels like weight without origin or stories without words. The voice of inheritance feels like voices in your head or beliefs that support your behavior. Okay, that's the difference between ancestral trauma that's been handed down may not even have anything to do with you. It just is something that was descended down to you. But the voice of inheritance is shaped by your experience, right? This is something that you are living personally. The voices of inheritance is as a result from ancestral trauma. But the somatic residue is like heaviness in the legs, the hips, or the lower back, chronic fatigue without clear medical cause, tightness in the chest or throat when speaking truth, sensations of carrying weight in the shoulders or spine, sudden tears or emotional waves when hearing family stories, persistent anxiety or guilt when surpassing family limitations, tension that deepens in moments of success or joy, as though joy itself must be earned or explained. Spiritual hygiene practice is ancestral release flow, serves as a hygiene ritual for the soul's lineage. Movement becomes intercessory prayer. Sound becomes invocation. Shaking becomes clearing. What was once carried in silence is returned to the earth in ceremony. I love that. Cleansing movement practices for ancestral release flow. You can stomp, you can spiral your spine, shake your limbs, and seal it with the prayer. Begin seated or lying down. Wrap your arms around yourself and rock gently. Place your hand over your heart and your belly. Breathe slowly and speak aloud. I will not leave you. You're talking to yourself. I am here. I see you and I love you. Repeat that while touching your own face, your arms with reverence, and end by placing one hand on the altar of your womb and say, this is my home. I belong to me. The hygienic reframe is, I cleanse my bloodline with breath and movement. I release the burden of those who came before me. I carry forward only what is sacred, whole, and aligned. So that is the rest of this chapter. Very deep. So you see why I needed to take a break. This is very heavy. And I know it's going to be heavy for many. But to take on the work is courageous. There's always one that will be selected in the bloodline that'll be chosen to do the work. Sometimes it's the one that always was, the oddball out, or always saw things differently, or always questioned things. Many times viewed as the troublemaker, or, it's always that one, but that could be you. And the beauty about this book is it's very clear and concise, and it gives not only the problems, but she also gives solutions. And so this is beautiful. I'm going to end it here. Thank you for stopping by to watch. This station is Blood Moon Oracle, and my name is Leticia. And if you are willing to do the work, listen, here we are. Here we are. It starts with us. Each of us have a personal responsibility and obligation when something becomes apparent to fix it, right? It's like living in a household full of people, and there's this wad of toilet paper in the hallway that's just sitting there in the corner, just a balled up piece of toilet paper. And people pass by it 20, 30 times a day, saying in their mind, oh, somebody else is going to do it. Oh, she's going to do it. I know they see it. They'll do it. I'm in a rush. I'm busy. I'm doing something. And everybody's saying that. Nobody picks it up to go and toss it in the garbage. It's kind of like that. Hopefully that's not what happens. Because sometimes when something comes to our attention, it becomes our responsibility to step up and say something, or become a solution or part of the solution, or to fix it, or to break the pattern that we notice is no longer serving or is damaging. And so, is that you? I mean, if this chapter spoke to you, it may very well be. You may be the chain breaker. You may be the one that says, this stops with me. This changes here, right? And so thank you for stopping by. I'm going to end it there. Like, share, comment, subscribe if you feel led. And I will see you all next week if Spirit says the same. All right. Till next time, take care, you guys. Bye, love bugs.